got on my tractor and with my divine rod in my hand, and I said, show me where I should start planting my trees. And it marked out this, I had a plow on the back of the tractor, and I marked out this area. No, that God wanted me to plant with trees. And I've been guided by something, whatever people want to call it. I'm happy with the word God myself. But I've been guided in so many ways. It's just so amazing. All these multi-billionaires who want to go to Mars, it's ridiculous. They should want to colonize our deserts. And this, I'm sure, is going to happen. And so what I'm doing now, and I haven't got the money to do it, so I want to find a philanthropist who can help finance it. But instead of just injecting one squirt of water under each fruit ball as it's planted, I want to do them at several different depths below the tree, so there's a column of moist soil. Because it's just a matter of providing sufficient moisture for that little seedling to survive long enough for its roots to get down to permanent moisture.
You got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
Hello and welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember, if you like the shows, remember to send me a comment or like and subscribe to any platform that you're watching them on. Well, have I got a delicious guest to introduce you to today. I actually met him, well, I heard about him through Amrik Madhu, who was on the show at the end of last year talking about planting trees with drones, and David and Marik got together, and anyway, David's a fascinating person. Welcome to the show, David Kennett.
Thank you, Karen.
And David's over there his name is David Kennett, and he's over there in Western Australia. When I say over there, for those of you who don't understand Australia, I'm in Sydney, on the other side of the country. Like, it's kind of like being on the other side of the states. It's about the same distance, maybe, I don't know. So you're all the way over there in Western Australia.
5 hours apart by jumbo.
5 hours apart by jumbo. It took me longer when I flew over there a couple of years ago. Yes. But yeah, and we've been yakking online. I tell you, I contact people for a quick talk, but to meet them before the show, and 2 hours later we're still talking. We've got a lot to talk about. The cats come to say hello. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to read out your quite extensive bio. You sent me a short bio, but I kind of put a few things together so people get an idea of who you are.
Okay.
So here we go.
I'll correct you if necessary, okay?
You can correct me when I'm wrong. When David became unemployed in 1998, he began a passionate research into forestry practices in Australia, discovering practices that challenged many deeply entrenched beliefs. He recognised that traditional forestry methods inherited from Britain were possibly not the most appropriate for low rainfall regions of Australia. With an interest in water divining, and we'll talk about what that is later, he wondered whether this little understood talent might be able to reveal hidden secrets about nature, trees, and plants in general. When he divines, his default setting is to locate underground low water, as water is so important to life and the land. It was with this interest he became aware that through our sixth sense, we are all connected to something beyond our imagination. Finally, he thought, if something is able to tell me where water is and the depth of it and the quality of it and the low rate of flow, what else might be able to tell me? He discovered he could divine for water, not just on sites, but also on a map, even a sketch of a property, and now on Google Earth images anywhere on the planet. He set himself a goal to discover ways to make farm forestry in low rainfall districts a financially rewarding and effective means for addressing environmental issues. David felt convinced that if sufficient farmers were to come on board and implement effective forestry methods by planting just a moderate 5% of their cleared land, they could collectively produce worthwhile benefits for rural economics and the environment in general. But he discovered that something was amiss as he purchased a property in 2001 in Western Australia, as I said, on the other side of the country to me. David says, and this is in your words, the first time I walked on it, in certain places I burst out crying. A few days later, the person from whom I purchased the property came to see me and to see how things were going. And while having a cup of tea, they said to me, "You'll think I'm strange when I tell you this, but every time I would come over here," and he pointed to the place where I had cried, David says, "I would burst out crying." Naturally, I told him that I believed him, and it had also happened to me. 2 more visitors at different times had the same experience, David says. I divined, which is the thing that you do, divined, and determined a 22-year-old woman had committed suicide in that location in 1897. Words came to me, David said, into my head, and I prayed. Something I never did, you say. That the spirit guides of the deceased person come and collect her spirit and guide her to God so she could find peace, or as God sees fit. And I think about in that time you weren't really sort of into the whole God thing, were you? You were
No, that's right.
more of a scientist. So there you were, sort of fumbling around in the dark. Nobody has cried since that time, you say, and I seem to be particularly sensitive to spirit entities, and I realize that some of them can be very disruptive, which could result in getting incorrect information when divining for water. One has to protect oneself from this happening. And before I go anywhere on a property, I check them out for spirits on Google Earth and
Right.
pass them over. So you're on the map and you're checking out where spirits are sort of there, and you pass them over before you even get to the property, right?
Yes, exactly.
They seem to be everywhere, David says, as several times I have detected them and people knew of the particular incidents. They can impact adversely on people's mental health and the performance of businesses, etc. Sadly, it is very difficult to get people in Western society to believe in such things. What has been revealed to me over the years, David says, has been amazing, in particular about nature and restoring the environment to save mankind from self-destruction. Makes me want to cry. David has taught thousands of students in Nepal how to develop their inherent sixth sense, where they have been able to obtain amazing results in a multitude of different fields. The Aurora,
Auria.
Auria, sorry, Auria, AURAA, which is the name of your business, Arid Region Forestry Research Project, was begun by David in 2001 when he purchased 440 acres of highly degraded land in a low rainfall region of Western Australia. By 2010, the project was enlarged to cover 600 acres, and in excess of 500,000 trees have been planted.
Oh, over 1 million now.
Oh, okay, this is old. Over
That's
1 million
old. That's old
trees.
information.
You did tell me you were going to correct me if I was wrong. Wow, that's impressive. In recognition of this, its accomplishments, Auria was a finalist in the category of Meeting the Greenhouse Challenges in 2009, United Nations Association of Australia World Environment Day Award. In 2011, he was also again a finalist, this time in the individual award category. Yeah, so I was going to say, I heard about you through the beautiful Amrik Madur, who I had on at the end of the show. You two have teamed up to plant trees. He's got the drone thing happening.
Yes.
And you've got the formula to plant trees. And he was talking about you when I had him on the end of the show, and I thought, I have to meet this guy and hear his story. So we did connect before the show, and we yacked for hours. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into this? Like, you were kind of, you said at the beginning of this, you became unemployed.
That's
So
right.
you
Yes.
had a passion to, I don't know, serve Mother Earth in some way?
Well, I was put on, I was made redundant when I was 60, and I was put on work experience at a government department. They keep on changing the names, of course, but in those days, this particular department was called, what the heck was it called? Water and Rivers Commission. And one of my roles was to take phone calls from people who were wanting groundwater information in order to put down bores or wells. And anyway, one of the instructions I was given was that if anybody phoned from the Darling Scarp, which is the range of hills behind or to the eastern side of Perth, if anybody phoned from those areas, tell them not to even bother to look, because it was impossible to find good quality water. Any water that was found was highly saline and very low flows. Anyway, I took this as a challenge, and I advertised in the Hills Gazette newspaper, and lots of people contacted me who were desperate for water, and I found lots of really good quality water for people. And so I thought, wow, I'm pretty good at this, because I'd had a fascination for it all my life, and all sorts of occultish things, I suppose, to give it a term. But I'd never really got proof that things would work. But of course, when people were putting down their bores and phoning me up, and they say, "Wonderful, David, everybody around here's only got salty water, and now we've got wonderful flows of good water." So that's how it all started off. Then I also learned that the Agriculture Department, CSRO, CALM, etc., all these government departments were saying that in order to combat salinity, which is such a major problem in Western Australia and also India out of interest, and it's spreading all the way across Australia, that they'd have to revegetate 80% of their cleared land. And I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. If you tell somebody that they've got to revegetate 80% of the cleared land, they say, well, I won't bother to plant any trees. So they can't afford to take that sort of area out of production or the cost of such an exercise. Anyway, by chance, guided by spirit or something, I met this elderly forester. And so I told him that my concept that I had in mind was to plant trees above underground streams, which I could detect by divining. And they would reduce the recharge of the water tables, which is the cause of salinity, because the water tables rise. But what I didn't realize was that the water tables don't rise as a result of the underground streams. They rise as a result of just the rainfall that falls in that particular area. The underground streams can come from not just hundreds of kilometers away, but thousands of kilometers away. Mm. And this is why the quality of the water is so much better. Mm. And they can either be below the water table or above the water table. And anyway, so he thought this was a pretty good idea, and but then he went and died on me, so that was a bit unfortunate.
Then he went and died on you. Oh well, it doesn't mean you can't still talk to him. So okay, so let's get back to divining for people who don't know what divining is. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yes, I should have had a divining rod on my desk. Can you just bear with me one moment?
Sure. We'll wait. I'll have a cup of tea. I'll just have a cup of tea. It's only a podcast.
Sorry about that.
There he is.
I should have been better prepared.
That's fine.
It's really interesting. So often when I give talks about divining and I pick up one divining rod, and these people say to me, "Oh, but you should use two." And I say, "Well, who's the expert here, you or me?" And I say, "Well, I used to use two, but what would happen is you go across an underground stream, and either they'd go together like that, or they'd go apart." And I said, "Do you experience that?" And they all say, "Yes." So I say, "Do you know what the meaning of that is?" And they'd say, "No." So I say, "Well, okay, you're admitting that I'm the expert." So I say, if it goes to the right, that is the direction of flow. If it goes to the left, that's the direction of flow. But what is so amazing is we all have default settings in our brain. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, if we don't ask for anything and we just walk across the landscape, it will respond to water. And it will, for me, point downstream. But for other people, it will point upstream. But you can then just say, in future, I want you to point the other way. And straight away, it'll change direction.
You can just talk to it. You can talk to,
Yeah, it is just amazing.
like you talk to spirit. Okay, so if you've got two divining rods and
Yes.
they're going in opposite directions, what does that mean?
Well, for me, it is the right-hand one that is indicating the direction.
Okay.
So if they go apart, the right-hand one, as here in my hand, is pointing in that direction. But if they go together, then it's pointing, the flow is in that direction. But it's so fascinating because you can then just say, look, I want to know how deep the water is and there's below the surface. And there's a variety of different ways that you can do that. You can determine a depth to it and the quality of the water. And what I do is I just hold it in front of me and I just say, give me a can you see this on the screen, Karen?
Yep. Obviously, people who are listening on audio only can't, but
All
it's
right.
a little rod that's bent like a
Just L shape. That's right.
like a bit of a triangle. Yep.
And so I just say, give me a representation for the limit for human consumption. So it points straight out in front of me. And if I say pure H2O, it just points to my left. And so I can just say, well, give me a representation of the water that's in this underground stream. And it'll give me a position there. Or if it's really bad, it'll go right the way around past that. So you can determine that. And then in a similar way, you can just find out the yield, or the potential yield of a bore, just by saying, well, I do this right away. One of the ways is just say, will it yield more than 100 litres per hour or more than 1,000 litres an hour? And I say yes or no. And then you can just refine it down to a particular area. And it was amazing. There was one instance where I told them where to find the water on site. And I'd estimated the depth and the quality. Anyway, he phoned me up and he was laughing as he came on the phone. And I said, how are things going? So he said, you're bloody brilliant, David. So I said, oh, thank you. So he said, well, we found the water where you said it would be. And he said, it was at exactly the depth you said it would be, which is to the centimetre. And he said, but he said, he's got this wrong because he said it was pumping much more water. And he said, slowly it just reduced, and he said it came down to exactly what you had predicted.
Wow.
Litres per hour.
So do you think you're talking to the spirit of the land, like the Devic realm, like through the rod? And sort of, instead of just having a conversation in your head, you're sort of having the conversation through the rod and it's moving the rod? Is that, what do you think?
Well, I'm absolutely convinced. The word God just doesn't seem to be liked by so many people these days, but it's just a word to explain something. Like if I use the word brick, straight away people know, yes, they can refer to a brick. So we've got to refer to something with the same term. So I'm happy with the word God. And I tell a joke. I say all these people were just sitting around one day and saying, you know how we talk to something? And they say, oh, yes, well, how about we give it a name? So there's a dog sitting in the corner. And they said, well, how about dog? And they said, oh, no, but we'll change the letters around, make it God instead of dog. So that's my sense of humor. Anyway, it's just a word. Nobody knows what it is, who it is, or whatever. But I refer to God all the time. In fact, recently I just said to me, are you happy with the word God? And it said yes. And I said, would you prefer me to call you something else? And it came back as, yeah, call me Jehovah. But it was spelt out because I said spell it out for me. So I went through the alphabet and I got J-E-H. Anyway, it came up as J-E-H-H-O-V instead of A-R as E-R. I think when Jehovah is written, it's normally A-R at the end. So, but I still call him God. So, and I said, that was another thing. I said, are you male or female? And so it came back and it said, neither. I am deport. D-E-P-O-R-T. So I mentioned this to a guy who's very into words, and I wish I could remember what he came back with a few days later, because I just couldn't understand it. It's like deporting an illegal immigrant, that word, deport. And anyway, he came up with another meaning for the word, which seemed like a reasonable explanation, but I can't remember what it was now.
Oh, right. Okay.
My memory is not the best, unfortunately, at my age.
Well, you're looking good. You told me your age. Do you want to reveal your age to people who can see you on video?
Yeah, 78. 79 next month. Yeah.
You look amazing. You look absolutely amazing.
Oh, I'm lucky.
You've got such light in your eyes. Okay, so so you started talking to your divining rods, or the
Yes.
land, or the nature spirit.
God.
God or dog.
To me, God is the he is the boss, and he's probably got all these other people or spirits and things as underlings, but I just go to the boss every time, and I don't know where the replies come from, but they're instant. And this is what is so amazing. If 7 billion people in the world ask God a question at the same time, they all get an instant answer. It is as quick as that.
Absolutely.
It's all beyond our comprehension. Another thing that just came up recently, sorry, interrupting, and I divined, because it's always fascinated me that we are told that mankind evolved in Africa and has come out of and spread around the world. Anyway, so I asked God about this, and he said that was a load of crap. So he speaks very straightforwardly. He said, load of crap. And anyway, he said what happened was there's planets that were hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years ahead of us. And if you think about it, I don't know how long mankind's been on this earth, but we've only reached the learning curve that was absolutely flat for millions of years. And then in the last 150 years, you know, our knowledge has just increased so much. Now you imagine, and they're now talking of going to Mars and places like that. And so you imagine if other people were 1 million years ahead of us in time, you know, what sort of developments they would have.
Even 100 years ahead, even 1,000, you know, 100.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what he told me is the reason we have different ethnic groups on this planet is because other people on other planets destroyed their planet in exactly the same way as we're destroying ours, and they came to take refuge here. But of course, they came in small numbers, and so they didn't have the infrastructure with them. So they virtually had to start from scratch. So some people landed in, say, China and that sort of area, and then they built up there, but they were totally oblivious to people in Africa or Australia or whatever. And it's only in relatively recent times that you know, everybody has come together. But as I say, the scientists all say, oh, we all evolved and came out of Africa. And it says, when I divine for it, it says that there were actually 5 different ethnic groups on planet Earth originally, and then they were joined by these another 5, just by coincidence, another 5
off-world groups
from 5 other planets.
Yeah.
And to me, that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, what about the Incas? Is it the Incas that built Machu Picchu? They were a group of beings that came and lived for a few thousand years and then left.
Yes.
Got in spaceships and took off. They came to have a bit of a respite. Maybe their planet had been destroyed and they sort of came here and lived for a while and then went elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned this to somebody the other day on the internet, and they said, oh, they'd investigated this as well. And they said they don't know why people want to go to Mars, because evidently, according to the answers they'd got, Mars had actually been destroyed by nuclear warfare.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. In some timeline.
But why do people want to spend millions of dollars going to Mars when, and they're going to have to wear spacesuits, they're going to have to live in something domes or whatever. Whereas, why don't they spend their money on settling in our deserts?
Yes.
Where they've got air to breathe and transforming those.
Well, that's exactly what you're doing, right? So that's exactly what you're doing. Let's talk about how you came up with you know, buying the land. So you've become unemployed, you're kind of opening to the universe and you're discovering all this stuff, and you were guided, obviously, to buy this bit of land in Western Australia that was completely arid. Like,
well, Salt degraded.
Salt degraded. From above, it looked white because it was just like all this salt had. And everyone said, you cannot plant anything on this land. It's completely destroyed. And what happened?
Well, I was giving a talk down at somewhere down south. There was this guy from the ag department, and I told him what my idea was, which at that stage was to plant the trees above the underground stream. Anyway, typical scientist, he just rolled his eyes back in his head and I said, look, go and buy some land, David. And he said, we'll come and have a look at them and just see if your concepts are working. Anyway, for best part of 20 years, I emailed him, please come and have a look, please come and have a look. And anyway, he always said, oh, you're on the whiteboard and I'll get there sometime, but never arrived. And anyway, in the meantime, I planted all these trees and was more and more convinced. And now I've lost my line of thought.
We're talking about how you came to buy the land.
Oh, yes, that's right. So I was convinced that I had to buy some land. So Spirit guided me to a particular shopping centre where I happened to know that there was a real estate agent with a view to getting a publication called, can't remember what it's called now. Oh, The Realtor, that's right. Anyway, so as I went to go through the door, it was almost like somebody was pulling me back. I couldn't go through the door. It was such an amazing experience for me. But I knew that I'd been guided to this shopping centre, so I wandered around, and in the end I went into a newsagent. Again, I was pulled into the newsagent, and I never go into newsagents normally, so I just wandered up and down the aisles, and all of a sudden there was this publication bouncing up and down, or it appeared to be bouncing up and down. It obviously wasn't, but that's how I perceived it. And anyway, it was a publication here in Western Australia called Quokka. I don't know whether that's over east as well. But I thought, oh, what is it? Because I'd never heard of it. And I opened it up, selling secondhand stuff. And lo and behold, I opened it up and there was land. And there was this land, 600 acres, 300 salt degraded, 300 reasonable land at a price I could afford to pay cash for. I thought, wow. So anyway, so I phoned the guy up, and so I came up and had a look at it, and I just thought, oh my goodness, to buy a piece of land like this, it's absolutely crazy. When, although I've enjoyed gardening to a certain extent over the years, I've never done anything en masse, and so I hummed and hawed about it. And then I bumped into a lady one day, and we were just talking general conversation, and she said, I think you should speak to this lady down in Albany. Maureen's her name. So she gave me this Maureen's phone number, and she turned out to be a clairvoyant. And I got on the phone, and she said, oh, I've got so much to tell you. She says, you just bought some terrible land. And I said, no, I haven't. And she said, I'm telling you, you bought some land. So I said, look, excuse me, but I would know if I had bought some land. So she said, well, you've looked at some land, have you? So I said, yes. So she said, it's got your name on it. And she said, and this is her actual terminology, she said, it doesn't matter how much you fart ass about. She said, it's got your name on it, and you will end up buying it. So I thought, bugger you, I'm not going to let you influence my decision. So this was in October, and the following May, a lady came into my life, and she was keen on eco-villages. And I thought, wow, that could be a good way of doing it. Get other people to have chalets on the property and help with the work, and we could work it that way. So she came up and with me to have a look at the land, and I never used to carry a checkbook because they were the rage in those days, and but for some reason I put my checkbook in my pocket, and that night I bought the land without her, just on my own. So anyway, the wife of the vendor, she had to sign the offer and acceptance as well. And she'd been down in Perth, and she didn't arrive back in Darwin until about midnight. And so it was about 3 o'clock by the time I got to bed. 7 o'clock, the phone rings. And I said, hello, who's that? And he says, I'm Fred. And Fred is the person from whom I bought it. So he said, what's the time? So I said, it's only about 4 hours since I got to bed. It's 7 o'clock. So I said, you've got my check deposit, you've got everything, all the paperwork signed. So he said, yes. So I said, well, what's wrong? So he says, you're not going to believe this. So I said, just tell me what the news and I can go back to sleep. So he says, it's 7 o'clock, as you said. And he said, this morning I've had 2 people both coming in independently wanting to buy the property.
Isn't that interesting?
And it had been on the market for 6 years or something.
Wow. Wow.
And just literally hours before they visited to buy it,
You bought it. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating?
Well, if I hadn't bought it that day, obviously they wouldn't have made that decision because.
Okay, so you bought the land, you bought this arid, salt-ridden land, which I suppose was going cheap because everyone thought, oh, you can't plant anything on that. It's just, it's full of
so many people had actually leased it for a year or so to see whether they might buy it, and they just thought this is a waste of time.
So here's you with your connection to spirit or Mother Nature or the Devic realm or whatever you want to call it, your guides, your mob, and
God.
God. And so tell us how you knew how to regenerate the land, because as we've said in the bio, how many trees have you? Like a million? Crikey.
Over 1 million.
Yeah. On land that was completely, you couldn't plant anything on it, like the regeneration of planet Earth. Thank you.
Well, you could plant them, but they'd all die. So everybody told me.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I was born in Sydney, but I've been back and forth to England heaps of times. And over there, I was quite keen on gardening over there. And everything I planted just was magical. And neighbours who were really keen on gardening, as opposed to me just being casual, they just said, what do you do that's different? And I said, well, I do put the roots in the ground. I think that's a good idea rather than the leaves. And
I do plant it right side up.
Yeah. But obviously I've just got green fingers or green thumb.
Well, you're obviously connected to the Devic realm, the nature spirits, the whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Whatever you want to call it. Maybe you're a little incarnated Devic fairy.
Whatever. Anyway, so I bought the land, and the guy lent me his tractor, so I could, in fact, the guy that lent me the tractor was one of the other people who had decided that just after I'd bought it to buy it. So he missed out, but he lent me his tractor and I did ripping, and it turned out that he was not really into divining at all because he's born again Christian or whatever they are, and they're not really into divining. And so he said, where are you going to plant your first row of trees? So I said, I haven't really thought about that yet. So he said, how about you get your divining rod out?
Divining rod. Yeah, for those people that don't understand divining is what we were talking about before with the rod that shows you where the underground water is. It's called divining. Isn't it interesting that it's called divining?
Yeah, well, divine seems to be an association with God again, doesn't it? The divine.
Does.
Yeah.
So you were divining on the land to find water?
No, well, it wasn't really to look for water. It was just where to do anything. So I just said with my divine rod as we walked in from the gate, where should I plant my first row of trees? And I'd go along there, and all of a sudden it just turned about 45 degrees. And so it said, plant a row of trees there. So that's what I did. And they're there to this day, as testament.
So how did you get trees to grow in this completely arid, salt-ridden soil? Like, what was the secret?
Well, I was really just playing things by ear because I realized that tree species are soil specific. In some areas we get say salmon gums growing. In another area you'll get a eucalyptus platypus growing. But while they might survive in a particular area, there's areas where they do so much better. And I had some visitors the other day, and we went down, and I said, look at this row of salmon gums, and they're all good, but all of a sudden there's a soil change, and they're not just good, they are fantastic. And they just said in unison that if we hadn't seen this, we wouldn't have believed it, because it was just so dramatic. And so it's pointless trying to plant trees that are not suitable. It's like a lot of New South Wales trees, for argument's sake, probably wouldn't be suited to growing over here. In the same way, a lot of our Western Australian trees mightn't be suitable for growing over in the Sydney area. But so what I did is I ordered a whole lot of trees, and I had them on my trailer, and I got an alignment with the divine rod, and I said, show me which trees you want me to plant down this particular row. And so I just, with the trailer there, I go along and it would select the different trees. So I just put them in, and generally it was 5 or 6 different varieties. So I planted them in rotation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with the thought that in some species might grow in one place and some species might grow in another, and so they die. And but it was really fascinating because this showed me where the soil changes were occurring. But what I then discovered was that I can just say on the side of my tractor or the tree planter or whatever, I could just say, have a line. And I say, okay, this end of the line represents where we are at the moment. The other end of the line represents the far end of the row. Where should I plant this particular tree? So we'll say salmon gum. And as I go along the line, it'll say at a certain place, start planting here, stop planting there. And then I'll say with another variety, where should I plant that? And it's just so incredible, Karen. It identifies where the soil changes occur. Wow. And where one should plant the different species.
You just got to talk to the land, don't you? Or the Devic realm or God or whatever you want to call it. You just got to communicate with it. Yeah.
That's right. Just ask and you'll be told.
Ask.
And so often in life, we say, God only knows how I do that. So I say to people,
speak to God.
If God only knows, if only God knows, ask him.
Yeah. Or her. Okay. Or so her. How did you get involved with, coming up with the kind of trapped spirits on the land, or trapped thought forms, or whatever you want to call it? Like in the, we talked about you finding a place, what was it, where someone was crying? What was it?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, the first time I walked on a property, I went to the top and I looked down over the valley, which was just absolutely horrendous. There were 5 trees there in those days, and you just look down over this degraded land, this white floodplain, and I burst out crying. And you automatically know, as a guy of 70 or whatever I was, 68 or something. Oh, I've lost track of time.
Doesn't matter. You're an adult. Yeah.
You 60 years of age. That's right. You try and justify it to yourself. Why I was crying? I just thought, well, on the say-so of a bit of bent wire, I've bought this land with no experience really of growing trees to address salinity. And so I thought the magnitude of that just suddenly hit me. Uh-huh. But no, it was the fact that I divined and found that this 22-year-old woman had committed suicide on the property in 1897. And,
but how did you find that out? Through divining? Or, like you're obviously having telepathic communication with the soul.
Yeah.
Or, something else was going on.
Well, I just held the divine rod in my hand and I said, somebody died here? And said, yes. Okay. So I said, whereabouts? And it indicated this particular place where I'd tried. So I said, was it male or female? And male, the divine rod turns right and female turns left. And so I then said, how old was this person? More than 20? And said, yes. More than 30? No. So I then said 21, 22, and it said yes. And it indicated that she'd committed suicide, because I just said, did she die from accident, murder, or suicide? And it said suicide. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so then I phoned a lady, a friend of mine, Angie, and I said, you do spiritual clearing, Angie, don't you? So she said, what's the problem? So I told her, and she said, oh, I don't have to come up. She says, you could just do it if your intent is right.
Yeah.
So, and I used exactly the same words. The words just came into my head. I said, dear God, isn't it crazy? I pray that the spirit guides of the deceased person come and collect the spirit and guide her to God so she could find eternal peace and happiness as God sees fit.
Right.
And she went. Yeah.
How did you know she went? How did you know she went?
Because I asked the divine rod.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
But the guy from whom I bought it, he'd come across and one day, and he said, we're having a cup of tea, and he said, you'll think I'm crazy, Dave, when I tell you this, but he said, whenever I'd come across here, because his house was on the other side of the road, he said, I'd burst out crying. And I said, well, I believe you, Fred, because it's already happened to me. Yeah. And then 2 other people came up independently, and they both burst out crying in the same place. And anyway, then I realized that sometimes when I did water divining, it would be spot on, and other times it would be wrong. And I realized that a lot of these spiritual entities are so tormented that they'll just interfere with the divining, and you'll get it wrong. But it is so. I check every property out now A friend of mine, well, an acquaintance rather than a friend, he sent me this email one day, and he said, "Oh, David," he said, "I'm looking for water on my mother's property down in Darken, which is a couple of 100 k's away from here." And he said, so he'd just drawn a mud map of it on a piece of paper. So what he thought. Anyway, I checked it out for spirits, and there was an Aboriginal spirit, and there was also a spirit entity of a 22-year-old man who'd died in an agricultural accident 53 years before. Anyway,
very specific for just talking to a rod that's bending back and
forth. Oh, that's right.
So you've obviously got this communication happening, like without.
Oh, well, let me just finish the story because it's really fascinating. So I emailed him and told him this. So a couple of days later, he contacted me back, and he said, "I phoned my mother up, and he said, had anybody ever died?" He'd asked her if anybody had ever died on the land, and she said, "Oh, yes, before you were born, 53 years ago, a young man that was employed by your father died in the southwest corner of the second paddock," which is exactly where I've identified it.
And did you talk to the spirit of the...
Yeah, I cleared it because I clear every entity away before I do the water divining.
Okay, so they can't interrupt with the...
That's right.
With the results. So this is such, fascinating information for people that are working with the land. It's so interesting because, in your bio, you said that you can have these conversations with people in, is it Nepal or Indonesia? Where do you go?
In Nepal, yes, Nepal.
But you can't do it with farmers in Australia because they just won't, come at this conversation. And yet you've bought this arid land full of salt, and you've planted now, how many trees? A million trees?
Million, over a million.
A million trees. And so you've regenerated this completely unregeneratable, according to science and farmers, land. And why aren't people sitting up and listening to you? Because you've got results. I talk to the Devic realm or talk to the spirits that are trapped on the land. Why aren't people listening to you?
Well, this I can't understand.
Wake up, humanity.
well, I studied civil engineering at London University, and so the idea of drains appealed to me to get rid of this water that's because they've cleared so much natural vegetation from the landscapes. The water table has risen because previously the trees would transpire all that moisture to the atmosphere and the water tables would remain low. But then they've risen over the years, and in the valley floors, the water's come to the surface, and then the H2O evaporates away and leaves the salt on the surface, and this is why we have the problem. Anyway, these neighbors wanted to have drains through the catchment, and although I didn't really want them, I felt in a 46,000 hectare catchment, with just my 242 hectares, 600 acres, I was such a small player that I had to really cooperate with my neighbors if I wanted to get on with them. And the only way the water could get out of the catchment in their drains was by passing through my property. So I said, well, as long as you pay for it, I'm quite happy to do it. And it was only, they were 11 kilometers long, and it was only 600 meters through my property. So they were quite happy to pay for that. Anyway, what is really fascinating is that I had them cleaned out recently, and when the excavator came along, there was absolutely no water infiltrating the drains on my property at all. The only water that was coming into the drains was from further up the catchment. The trees had lowered the water table by over 2.5 meters.
Is that
and this is why the trees are growing. It's some areas of the valley floor were worse than others, and so I got on my tractor and with my divine rod in my hand, and I said, show me where I should start planting my trees. And it marked out this. I had a plow on the back of the tractor, and I marked out this area. No, that God wanted me to plant with trees. And I've been guided by something, whatever people want to call it. I'm happy with the word God myself. But I've been guided in so many ways. It's just so amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I've just expanded upon that area. As they lowered the water table a bit, I was then able to expand out a bit further. And then as those grew and loaded, I've been able to go out. And so this has all been taking place since 2001. And now I've just about covered the entire property with trees now.
Trees, I know. You've regenerated unregeneratable land. During the fires just after Christmas, so much devastation happening. in
Yes.
Australia. I was at a kirtan, I was at a music thing, and I
Right.
had God, for a better word, or my guides talk to me.
Yes.
Or even Mother Gaia. It could have been Mother Gaia. And she asked me to stand up and give this message to the group of about 200 people, and I didn't have the guts to do it. There were enough people on stage. Anyway, she gave me this message, and she said, remember to thank the fires when you pray for rain. And the fires are all part of a balancing process that I'm going through, and not to resist what's happening. Okay, it's devastating, and people are losing property and life. My daughter lost everything. And
Oh, dear.
she said at the end, she gave me a whole lot of information, and I'm going to say it's Mother Gaia speaking to me. She said at the end, when humans learn how to live with the earth and not on the earth, you won't go through this devastation. Because you can actually, sometimes the fires come to regenerate the land, like driving through the coast recently and seeing the black trees just like sprout with like all up the whole, just go bang with new life. And within a few short months, all these dead forests will be just alive with life. It's almost like this fire has just will regenerate those. Sure, it's burnt down quite a few properties, my daughter's being one of them. But and that's what you're doing, David. You're communicating with her. I call her Mother Nature, instead of just on her. Like you're living with her, not just on her. So you're actually doing what she said to do. When humans learn to live with her instead of just on her, they won't go through the devastation that we've experienced with the fires.
Yeah. Well, nature is just so clever, or God is so clever, or Gaia, whatever it is. It is just so amazing. And people are so rude about weeds. No, weeds have such terrible connotations associated with them. But if we don't plant anything on the land, God will grow weeds.
God will.
and they will improve the soil. But everybody says, oh, they're terrible. And everybody who recommends growing trees, all the so-called experts, they say, oh, you've got to kill all the weeds with glyphosate before you plant your trees, because otherwise the weeds are going to compete for moisture and nutrients in the soil and they'll kill them. Well, what I've discovered is that they don't kill them. They are adding nutrients to the soil.
There you go.
But everybody wants to follow the English type methods for planting trees. And so because in Western Australia, traditionally our rain comes mostly in the wintertime, they say, oh, plant the trees then. But as soon as the winter rains arrive, the weeds just grow dramatically. And because the seedlings are so short, the weeds shade them and deprive the little trees from daylight. And without light, they die. But if you wait till the end of August, when all the winter weeds have died naturally, they've completed their life cycle in order to procreate, they've all died, I plough them in, I plant my trees in September, October, November, and even in December some years, and I get 100% survival because it's so dry, well, except for this year, for some reason, we're getting all this rain now, but normally there's just no weeds that germinate in the summertime.
Yeah.
So the trees just say thank you. And one day I went out there and it was 43 degrees when we stopped work. It went up to 50 degrees on my thermometer on the balcony.
That's Celsius for people that are listening.
Yeah.
Translate that into Fahrenheit.
It's about 140 degrees.
That is hot.
Yeah. Anyway, I went down the next day thinking all these trees are going to be frizzled. And there they were, blowing around in the breeze saying, thank you, David. Thank you, David. Virtually 100% survival. But another thing that I do with the divining rod, there's a chronic weed here, really infests everywhere in the agricultural region. It's called African lovegrass, and obviously it came from Africa. Anyway, one of the other things I do, if I say lead, for argument's sake, the divining rod would just rotate to due north. If I say gold, it'll go to another angle. If I say nitrogen, it goes about west, and if I say magnesium, it'll go about east. So there's different compass bearings 2.5 degrees apart, which represent each of these radii, if you like, in a circle, represent different elements. So I asked what element this particular African lovegrass is putting into the soil. Now, the soils in Western Australia are some of the most nutrient deficient soils in the world.
Right.
And so if a plant comes along and it recognizes it's got a role to play, it's not because of what is there as regards nutrients, it's what is not there. And this is a whole paradigm shift.
Okay.
So this African lovegrass recognizes that the soil is lacking in magnesium. And so I mixed up some Epsom salts, a kilogram in a 1,000-litre firefighter, and I sprayed the African lovegrass with this magnesium sulfate, and it's all died. No chemicals, nasty chemicals, just a natural element, a naturally occurring element that is vital for improving the soil.
Wow.
But it's killed the weed. The weed has said, "You've put me out of work. Yeah, I'm not needed." Yeah. And there was a guy came up from a government department recently, and all he wanted to do was talk about his achievements. And I thought, bugger you, you've come up here to find out what I'm doing. And anyway, finally he realized the folly. And we went down and I said, would you be interested in having a look at this, the way the magnesium sulfate has killed the weeds? So he said, oh, yes. And you could see, I'm going to prove you wrong, David. His whole attitude was so science-based. And anyway, when we get to where I'd sprayed these weeds, he jumps out of the car with great enthusiasm and he goes over and he pulls it. And I said, is it dead? He said, yes, it's definitely dead. He was virtually annoyed that I was right. Yeah. And this is a problem we face. And Karen, it so annoys me because most of these experts, they've just been to university or school and university, and they've just learnt to repeat what they've been told. They've very few have actually come up with new research and new ideas themselves. And these ideas are become so deeply entrenched. When somebody offers a solution which is different from what they've been taught, they just can't handle it.
Well, we've got a few internet problems because there was a big storm in Western Australia which knocked out the internet, so we couldn't do this yesterday. So for people that are watching this, not listening to it, you'll see that David's out of sync sometimes. So what do you think, David, will change that? What do you think will change that? You're obviously completely connected to the Devic realm, the nature spirits, and communing and communicating with them. What do you think can change?
Well, I'll tell you how I've been guided on this pathway because it's so amazing. As I said, I was born in Sydney and been to England back and forth. And every time I worked in England, I earned heaps of money. And every time I came home to Australia, I went broke. And so I'd go back to England again. And anyway, I came back to Australia in 1980 and I went into business with 3 other guys, one of whom was a crook, and he just cleared me out financially. And I thought, Anyway, so I thought, I want a job where I can just clock on and clock off and get regular money and be able to get a mortgage again and buy another house. So lo and behold, I phoned up MTT, which is Metropolitan Transport Trust, who ran the buses in Perth. So I said, is there any chance you're looking for bus drivers? I thought, no, that'd be simple because I enjoy driving and I enjoy a bit of interaction with people. And I said, oh no, we won't even send you an application form because we got such a long waiting list already. So that was on the Wednesday or the Thursday. And on the Friday, my cousin phones me up and he says, David, he says, I've got a request. So I said, what's that? So he said, I've been invited to a party. And he said, I hate parties as much as you do. But he said, I feel the need to go along to this party. So would you come along? At least we can talk to each other. So I said, okay, that's fair enough. So we went along. In the course of conversation, the host says to me, what do you do for a job, David? So I said, well, as a matter of fact, I've just lost all my money and I'm just wanting to find a job where I can clock on and clock off. So he says, have you ever thought of driving buses? So I said, as a matter of fact, I have. I said, I just phoned up MTT on Wednesday and they said that they wouldn't even send me out an application list. So he said, do you know what my job is? So I said, I haven't a clue. He said, I'm the employment officer for MTT.
I love it. Don't you love it?
If that's not divine guidance, what is?
Synchro destiny, that is. Synchronicity.
That's right.
Synchro destiny. Yep.
Anyway, then in 1998, they were privatizing the buses. And I'd been thinking of getting out of and doing something to make better use of the education I'd had. And anyway, one of the women bus drivers, she said to me, if you ever see this guy, Patrick, he calls himself the clairvoyant to the clairvoyant, make sure you see him. So lo and behold, I was going to a weekend market with a view to setting up a stand to do some sales. And so I see this Patrick there. So I go along and he said, wow, he says, thanks for coming to see me. He says, I've been waiting for you. So I said, oh, really? So he said, yeah. I thought it was a load of bullshit. So he said, I've got a wealth of stuff to tell you. So I said, well, sit. So he said, sit down. So he said, through no fault of your own, there's going to be a major change of direction in your life. Well, when the buses were privatized, none of the private companies wanted me because on the application forms, they said, have you had major surgery? And I'd had spinal operation. And so I was rejected by all the private companies. Anyway, so he then went on to say, this massive change of direction, you'll be using your intuition. And he said, you're going to have a great deal of resentment for what you're doing for a long period of time. He said, after about 5 years, a younger man will come into your life who will be really interested in what you're doing. And that's when I met Amric. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So anyway, so he said we'd be associated for the rest of our lives. And then he said, although it scared the living daylight out of me, he says, because you don't like talking to crowds of people. I'm happy on a one-to-one basis, but I'd never stand up in front of a crowd of people and spout anything. He said, you'll end up talking to crowds the sort of size that the Pope attracts.
Wow.
And he
I
said,
can see that. I'm sitting here as you're yakking away, and I'm thinking, I've got to introduce you to Penny Kelly, and you've got to get online and start talking. All these things are going through my head about how you can start to share your knowledge, especially with that communion or communication you have with the land. You know, I know you call it God, but you're really connected to the Devic realm, and you're talking to them through your divining rods. Whatever you call it, it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's right. Working, you know, you've got proof. You've got this regenerated of completely arid land because you're tapped in, turned on, tuned into this connection with Gaia herself, with Mother Gaia and her Devic realm, or call it God if you like. Yeah, and I can see you talking to crowds of people too. You know, you've got the proof behind you, David. You've got this hand. Anyway, so go on. Amric, yep. And he'd be talking to people the size of like the Pope. Yep. What else did he say?
Anyway, so I then thought, well, I should get onto Facebook. And so I post on Facebook. And a young forester in Nepal contacted me. And from that, I've got over 3,500 friends in Nepal now. I went over in 2018 just for a short period of time. And also I visited India. And they loved what I was doing, but I got very ill over there. So I curtailed the trip, unfortunately, but that's just how it had to be. Anyway, everybody I'd gone to invited me back. They said, please come again. So I went back last year, 2019, and spent 3 months over there. Again, people were so disappointed. They were saying, no, please come here and please come there. And but there just wasn't enough time. So I've booked my flight and I'm going back on the 1st of May this year. And
what are you teaching them over there? You're teaching them to divine with the divining rods?
Yeah, I realize our divining, our connection to divas or whatever you want to call it is just so phenomenal. And when I teach these, well, first of all, most of the places I go to are schools, and I like to teach those 16, 17, 18-year-olds because they are receptive to new ideas. Older people anywhere in the world are much more closed-minded. And you have this crowd of 40 or 50 children in a class, and there's a pathway down the middle of the desks and whatever, and all the kids are looking on and whatever. So I say, you come here. And so I put a divining rod in their hand. I just say, walk down there. And I've already walked down there myself, so I know where the underground streams are. And as they go along, the divine rod turns, and their eyes just about pop out of their head. You know, what's causing that? And they're very shy initially to come forward and volunteer. But by the end of the class, everybody says, oh, let me have a divine rod. I want to have a go. I want to have a go. And the enthusiasm is just absolutely amazing. And so it's so satisfying. So anyway, there's a principal of a school, and he's got 60 other schools under his control, And anyway, he arranged for me to give classes at different schools. And anyway, so I've sent him all the contacts I've got, and he said he's worked out a schedule for 85 days.
Wow.
Yeah. But
So,
it's amazing because a lot of people are worried about spirits and things, and but they are there. And when I was in Gorka Hotel one night, this spirit literally attacked me, and I was thrown against the wall. And it was a bit like a comic magazine, like Wham Bam, and there was all these like chat bubbles or whatever you call them. I don't know what you call them, but I could see these words and hear these words. And then I went to bed and I had this most terrible dream. I was rotting in a coffin, buried alive. And, anyway, in the morning I went down, and I don't know why I didn't do it during the night or beforehand. And I divined that where I'd been attacked, there was this spiritual entity there who obviously didn't like me for some reason.
maybe he just didn't like anybody. I don't think it was personal. So what did you do?
So I cleared it. And but one of the other schools, I went there, and you don't know who you're going to see there and whatever. And normally you go in and they offer you a cup of tea in the teacher's room and meet the principal and whatever. And then you go to the class and conduct the class. And generally, some of the teachers come to the class as well. Anyway, at the end of this, when I arrived at the school, I went in through the main gate, and there was a large playground. And I went through and I just divined, and there was two spiritual entities there. One was a 8-year-old boy who'd died at some stage, and I can't remember what the other one was. Anyway, in the course of the class, I mentioned that I'd cleared these spirits. Anyway, when the class finished, the principal said to me, let's go and have a cup of tea now. So he said, oh, you mentioned that you cleared a couple of spirits in the playground. So I said, yes. So he said, can you just check out the rest of the building place? So I said, yes. So he got up to go, and I said, look, we don't have to go. I said, just draw a sketch of it on the ground or on the coffee table. And so he just said, well, that's about the shape of the school. So I said, fine. So I divined, and I said, oh, look, there's a spiritual entity there and there's a spiritual entity there. He said, David, that is amazing. He said, whenever I go through those two places, he said, I get a cold chill. He said, I know there's something there.
Wow.
Yeah. But,
so how do you clear them? You just ask them politely to leave, thank you.
No, just as I mentioned earlier, I just call upon the spirit guides of the deceased person to come and collect them and guide them to God so that they can find eternal peace and happiness as God sees fit.
That's so funny because I experienced the same thing in the shower. I had this conversation with Michael Tamora, a brilliant teacher that I have on the show, who's actually coming on next week. And I was in the shower and I saw this hideous face that had obviously been shot. He looked like he'd been shot in the eye. His eye had been, and he was kind of scary. And clearing spirit guides is not really my job.
No.
But I just said the same thing. I just said, guys that look after him, come get him. And I said to this guy, I know you're reaching out to me, but listen to these guys. I don't know what to do. Go speak to them. I had no idea what to do. I just was like, wow, a scary face in the shower in my third eye. Yeah, so I did the same thing. You just ask the spirit guides, listen to your spirit guides. So why do you think they've not listened to the spirit guides before that?
I don't know. I really don't know. So many of the spirits that I come across are actually of Aboriginal young men between the ages of 16 and 26.
Is this on your land or in general?
In general, anyway. Mm. And when anybody says, could I do water divining, I check out their properties, or if people phone up and they say, look, they've got entities there that are causing problems. So I check these out first of all. And
so how old did you say they were Aboriginal spirits between
16 to 26. And they always...
They've committed suicide or something?
So when I ask how they died, it is always as a result of suicide.
Yes.
But it's not suicide as we see it.
Right.
What has happened is that they've committed a crime which in their society is punishable by having the bone pointed at them.
Oh.
And they die. So they've died as a result of their own actions.
Oh.
And it almost always is rape.
Wow.
They've committed rape.
Wow, David.
Yeah, and they're everywhere. There's a lady, she contacted me one time, and she's got a house in Perth, and she said that this son has got a poltergeist in his room, and she said, it is terrible. This poltergeist just throws him around. Anyway, I looked it on Google Earth and I identified a corner of the house where there was this spirit there, and I cleared it. And anyway, she phoned me up and she said, David, magic, no problem. Anyway, then she contacted me again and she said, oh, never told you, but we're fly in, fly out up on the mines. And she said, there's a guy there, a Yugoslav guy, who's okay when he's in Perth, but as soon as he goes to the mines, he's absolutely in a terrible mental state. And anyway, so I looked at the mine site, which was way out somewhere in the bush, and there was all these dongers, and there was slap bang in the middle of these dongers, there was this spirit guide. So I cleared the spirit. And anyway, she contacted me a couple of weeks later and she said, oh, the shifts have met up again. So she said, I had a word with this guy whose name was whatever it was. And she said, how are you feeling these days? And he said, I don't know what's happened, but no problems now. And so wow. she then told him that she told me about him and what his problem was. And
so you have to explain to people what a donger is.
Oh, right. A donger is...
I was staying in a donger on the weekend and I was telling people, the dongers. Anyway, tell people what a donger is.
Donger is a transportable living accommodation that they use on mine sites. So
very basic.
Yeah, they've generally got a bedroom and a shower room and a kitchen and whatever. And it's just like a shipping container, really.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. We went to a festival on the weekend, fabulous festival, Unity Festival, 500 of us dancing and singing, and we had a great time. Anyway, and we stayed in this really basic accommodation. It was just like a little wooden house and just wooden board sort of, bunks, just with a little sponge mattress. And I'm like, oh, a donger, because I stayed in a donger before and everyone's looking at me going, a what? It's like, we're living in a donger. So there's like 8 of us. You could sleep 10 in this little tiny box. Anyway, I snored. I said to everyone, I hope I don't keep you awake with my snoring.
It's strange, when people mention things in conversation, other things just pop into your own mind as well. And when you're talking about these beds, it just about made me cry. One of the boarding schools I went to, they said, oh, come through and look at the accommodation. They had bunk beds, rather like behind my doona here, but not springs or anything, just flat steel.
Oh, and no mattress on top?
No mattress. Oh. And at the end was a couple of blankets. Oh. But it gets so cold up there in summer, in winter, and so hot in summer.
So where's this in Nepal?
Nepal. I used to say Nepal, but they all say Nepal.
Nepal.
So I'm not trying to go off.
Oh wow, yeah.
But they're just so amazing.
They're very receptive to you over there, and you found the Australians are not as much.
That's right. But they're particularly receptive when you can show them something that they can identify with.
Right.
And one of the schools I went to, I said, look, we'll try and have a look at the school on Google Earth. But this was in Kathmandu, and it's the most polluted city on the planet.
Wow.
Anyway, so you just couldn't see the school. So I said, look, don't worry about it. I said, I would draw the shape of the school grounds on the coffee table. So I just said, right, this corner of the coffee table is that edge of the property. And so the divine rod goes out and it does like a rectangle, but with a triangle cut off one corner. And the 5 teachers in the room just all went, oh, that's amazing. And they said, that's exactly the shape of it.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing. And then I divined for spirit challenges and cleared them. And it's just, but while I say they're so open to it, there's a guy that's used to be the Shah's president here, and farmer and his wife, and the wife is a not a priest, but whatever you call them, Anglican, whatever. And anyway, so they got this property and that they were handing over to their son and daughter-in-law. Anyway, they said, and I'd participated in some tree planting up there many, many years ago before I had my own property. Mm. And so I said, look, I'd love to have a look at these trees. So we go over there and he says, look, I've just, and he and I were on our own, and the wife wasn't with us at that stage. So he said, look, I've just got to sign these documents handing over the property. So he said, it's rather private business, obviously. So he said, do you mind just waiting outside while I do that? So I said, no problem. So while I'm out there just kicking the tires of the car, I just think, oh, I wonder if there's an unusual shape of a paddock on their property. So I drew this this particular shape of this paddock. So then I just waited a few minutes and he came out, and I said, Dale, have you got a one of your paddocks this shape? So he said, oh yes. He said, we call it so-and-so. So I said, oh, fantastic. So anyway, with that, the wife drew up in her car, and so I said, oh, let's just have a look at where the soil changes occur. And so then, as I say, the wife just arrived, and he says to her, oh, David's just identified such and such a property. She said, oh yes, not knowing really what identified meant, but it was there drawn on the ground, about 8 foot square. And he said, he's just going to identify where the soil changes. So I identify where the soil changes occur. He said, that's amazing. He said, when my dad and I cleared the land, he said, on that area of land, there was such and such a tree growing. And he said, on that area of land, there was a different type of tree growing. And he said, it's exactly right. Now, you'd have thought in his position as a Shah president, he would have been enthusiastic. But whenever we go to a meeting and he gets up and talks, he always refers to me as the greenie, in a very sarcastic term.
Look, that's not such a bad term, a greenie. You've been called worse things,
Oh, that's right, but it's not what's said, but it's the tone in which it's said.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been up here for 20 years, and I've only had one person call in unannounced in that time. And through the grapevine, I hear that, oh, so-and-so is really impressed with what you're doing. And I think, well, why the hell don't they come and tell me rather than telling a third party? And why don't they come and have a look at what I'm actually doing so they can learn from it or whatever?
Well, let's have a chat about how you and Amrik got together. So Amrik, a passionate greenie, if you want to use that word,
yes,
passionate about the land and the regeneration of Mother Gaia, came up with this idea to plant trees with drones. And we discussed it on the show at the end of last year, if you want to see our conversation. It's a beautiful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys got together. So what are you guys doing together?
And I don't want to sound negative, but I've got all these million trees now. They produce billions of seeds every year, but you hardly see a naturally occurring tree. It's, nature produces these vast numbers of seeds because it knows that the difficulty is to get them to germinate and grow. And this is another thing that I've actually discovered, which is just so amazing. If I can just go on to this, if you don't mind. In the 1940s, just after the war, there was a couple of American scientists working in Germany, and they discovered within the Earth's magnetic field an electromagnetic grid pattern, which is named after one of the scientists, Dr. Manfred Curry. It's called the Curry grid. And these grid squares, I imagine they get smaller as you get to the poles and larger as you get to the equator. But here and also in Nepal, they're about 2.2 meters square. Anyway, these scientists never recognized the significance of them. Anyway, through the divining, you can just find them. Anybody who can use a divine rod can just say, show me a Curry grid square, and it'll just mark it out on the ground. And they're oriented to the northwest to southeast and from the northeast to southwest. And what I've discovered is that there's, within each of these 2.2 meter squares, there's 500 energy lines running that way, and there's 500 running that way, which gives you 250,000 intersection points. And what I've discovered is that every tree, the seed of every tree, is predisposed to a different and specific intersection point. So when the seed from a salmon gum happens to fall in exactly the right place, even though there might be other germination of seeds around it, when the conditions get tough, the one that survives is the one that's happened to have fallen in exactly the right place. And it's dramatic. And you can go along with a tree planter. I cannot divine the position of each and every tree. It's impossible. No, so it's just pot luck where the trees grow. Anyway, this elderly forester who I met originally, and I came up with this concept of planting over underground streams. He took me around different plantations to see what the effect of the underground streams were on the trees. And I said to him, Charles, why is this about 2% of the trees are like this and all the rest are like that? And he said, David, if you can find out the reason, you'll be worth $1 million. And you can prove this mathematically, that if you've got a grid pattern and you're basically planting a tree with a tree plant in a grid pattern, you know, depending on how the grids overlay each other, about 2% of the right positions will coincide. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. And this is why it happens. And at one of the universities in Nepal, I taught them all how to divine for the ideal position for a tree. And just coincidentally, there was a row of trees, I can't remember what they were, down the driveway outside the college. Must have been 70 or 80 of them, I suppose. So all these students come out with divine rods in their hand, and I say, right, no, divine for the ideal position for each of the trees. Now, about a meter due south of the ideal position for any tree, there's a worse position. And anybody who's planted trees always knows that if you plant a lot of trees, there's always the odd one that dies. And again, they're about 2%. And so they go along, and there was one tree that was massive and exactly the right place. Another one which not so good, it was about 20, 30 centimeters away from the ideal place. Then there was a gap, and that was exactly a meter due south of the ideal place. And we went along, and it was just so conclusive that, you know, this was accurate. And I've got rows of trees here, and there's a whole row of salmon gums. They're absolutely beautiful. And I had some people come up just the other day, and I said, look, come and look at these, because they really do identify the reality of what I'm doing. And so there's these salmon gums, I suppose there's 20 salmon gums, and they're all performing differently, but there's 2 that are doing really well compared with the others, and they're in exactly the right place. Then there's a soil change occurring, and you can see the trees that were going along at this level, all of a sudden are up there, twice the height. And you can just see they are so healthy. And then there's one, again, just one out of another 20 or 30, I suppose, that is in exactly the right place. And whereas the others are about this sort of diameter, this one's like that. But I can't get scientists to come up. They will not look.
So you have to really communicate with the land in order to, like, really communicate with the land, either through your divining with the rods or psychically. Mm-hmm. So
this clairvoyant that I saw years ago, he just said that, no, I'd be traveling all around the world and teaching people. And I'm sure Nepal is the stepping stone.
Well, we'll have to keep you on Earth for a few, I don't know, few decades. You'll have to live well into your hundreds.
I'm going to live to 120, I know that.
Oh, good. Okay, so I had a bit of a chat to an Aboriginal elder in spirit. Some friends of mine a while ago asked me to come and clear some energy near a cemetery, and it was interesting. I said, I don't do that. I'm not interested in that. Anyway, I woke up in the morning and I'm like, I'm going. So I come out there. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I meet an old friend. When I say old, we've known each other for a while, who I just was with on the weekend, actually, Fiona. I'm going to get her on the show. And we go into a cemetery where we're told not to go because it's like murky energy in there. So we go into it's like, if we're here to clear, and well, that's where we're going, into where the murky energy is. Anyway, this Aboriginal elder turned up in spirit and gave me this unbelievable vision of future Australia, future Earth, really.
Right.
Said that, you know, Australia is so arid now because when you fly over it, it's so dry. It's unbelievable. But in years to come, it will regenerate, like the whole of Australia will regenerate. But he said to me, this Aboriginal elder said to me that we didn't want humanity in a huge numbers on Australia in their current consciousness. And when humanity lifts their consciousness and we all love each other and learn to get on and learn to communicate with the Devic realm and nature and learn to sort of work with each other, you know, then Australia would regenerate, and it would be this lush country. You know, it wouldn't be this arid sort of almost desert when you fly over the center of it. It's so dry. And
I have just goosebumps all over. That is just affirmation that this is so right.
Yeah.
Amric and myself are absolutely convinced that the whole of the Nullarbor Plain is just going to become forest in due course.
Oh yeah, and there was this great lake, you know, this water under Australia that and that's the Great Artesian Basin, isn't it, that he was talking about?
That's
There's
right.
all this water under Australia that we can tap into, and that's what you've been talking to, you know, Mother Nature, if you like, about all this. Yeah. So it was really interesting, but he said it was purposely made arid because they you know, Gaia herself just didn't want humanity in their current consciousness or over the last few 100,000 years on this land, you know, and you look at this vast land mass, which is massive, and this tiny population, you
Yes.
know, that's purposeful. And yeah,
Well,
so
90% of Australia is arid or semi-arid.
yeah,
And I'm just in the process of trying to make a YouTube video. And I'm having so much I've recorded about 20 times, and every time I record it, I think, oh, I need to clarify that. So I rewrite the script and do it again. And I've just about got it right now. And so now I've got to add videos into it and whatever, and hopefully I can manage to do that. But in it, I'm just saying exactly this, that we can revegetate the desert. There's a program on television the other day, and there was these Bedouins in the Sahara Desert, and they just move camp on a regular basis. And in the middle of the Sahara Desert, they just dig a hole about 2 meters deep, and there's water there.
yeah,
So my methods, I've developed technology with my tree planter, which when we plant seedlings, they're about this tall, about 25, 30 centimeters tall. Well, if that was a seedling that had germinated in the bush, the roots of that tree would occupy 2 or 3 cubic meters of soil. But it's a tiny little root ball, about an inch by an inch by inch and a half, something like that. And so to sustain it, it's because it's got these leaves, it's transpiring moisture, it's a real challenge. So most people, what I tell people is they have to soak the root balls in water, and then you plant the tree really deep. So the root ball is about that far below the ground. So just a couple of leaves showing. So you reduce the demand for moisture. And everybody wants to water trees in, but that's the worst thing you do, because if it's hot and dry, the water evaporates away and it sucks all the moisture out of the ground. And so I plant them deep, and this has been the basis of what I do. So then I thought, well, for more and more arid regions, I've got to do something better. So now I've come up with a system, after a lot of failures, of where I inject water under each seedling just after it's been planted. If you inject it too much water or under too much pressure, it takes the line of least resistance, which is up to the surface, and again, it evaporates away. And literally, we did this in October one year when it was about 40 degrees, and trees planted at 7 o'clock in the morning were dead by lunchtime. And when you dug them up, you'd have thought the root ball had been in an oven. Absolutely unbelievable. All the moisture's gone from it. But nobody wants to come and have a look at these things, unfortunately. But now all these multi-billionaires who want to go to Mars, it's ridiculous. They should want to colonize our deserts. And this, I'm sure, is going to happen. And so what I'm doing now, and I haven't got the money to do it, so I want to find a philanthropist who can help finance it. But instead of just injecting one squirt of water under each root ball as it's planted, I want to do them at several different depths below the tree, so there's a column of moist soil. Because it's just a matter of providing sufficient moisture for that little seedling to survive long enough for its roots to get down to permanent moisture. And once we can do that, as long as there's a tree growing in the desert, and I've got a couple of photographs that I'm going to show people of isolated trees growing in deserts, that tree is indicating that there is water there, and it has got its roots down to that water. And if one's growing naturally, we can grow millions. So God just needs some help. Gaia needs some help.
God, just Gaia. So how did you get the salt out of your land? Like, how did you plant trees in unplantable, land with all that salt?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I went on to the floodplain, and I just asked the Divine Rod where I should plant initially. And in floodplains, generally the floodplain is not absolutely flat. They tend to be more slightly elevated, probably only half a meter in the middle. And anyway, it identified this area, and so I planted that. And what has happened over time, they have lowered the water table locally. The water table might be like this, but then there'd be a depression there, and then slowly you can expand out beyond it. And so it's a gradual process. But it's I also plant on what I call raised beds. I accumulate the soil into a raised bed, which is probably about 30 centimeters above the surrounding area. And it then tends to act as a wick, and it draws the moisture up into there, so it tends to retain the moisture. But also, everybody recognizes that most of the nutrients in the soil are in the topsoil. And so if you accumulate that topsoil into a mound, you're accumulating the nutrients as well. And so any trees that you plant in that mound are going to do better, or should do better.
Okay. Yeah. So that's, when you look at your land, that's what you've done. You've got these mounds and the trees.
Yes. And they're not very big. They're only quite small. And over a period of time, they'll probably just vertically just flatten out with the...
And it also creates like ridges for water to collect too next to them, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. Because when you're collecting it, you've got the ground coming along here, there's a bit of a depression before, because that's where you've accumulated the soil. So if there is rain, it'll go in those depressions, and then that in itself will infiltrate into
Okay, so we've covered a few things. I'm going to wrap it up now, but you're talking about all these disincarnate spirits that are sort of creating havoc in schools and on the land. What about in the city, David? Have you noticed that you come across, like, there must be plenty of like disincarnate spirits that have not crossed over, that are creating havoc? I remember a friend of mine, she's crossed over now, but she was in a house and she wouldn't stay in the house. She said it was a haunted house. So, and then she got some people in to clear it. Do you discover much of that in the city?
Oh, yes, yes. There's an elderly lady friend. She died several years ago now, unfortunately, but lovely old lady. And she and I used to go out for meals on a regular basis. And my favorite restaurant was a particular one. And she liked it as well. So we'd go to this. The first time we went to this place and found it, I thought, wow, it looks so nice, but there's nobody here. And it was on the corner of a main drag and a side street. And we went in there and the meal was absolutely fantastic. And I said, is this a typical night? And they said, oh yes, we don't get a lot of business. So I said to Lavinia, I said, I feel there's a bad spirit around here somewhere. So I'll just go out to the car and get my divine rod. Right outside the door, there was a spirit of an old man who'd been knocked down and killed by a car in an accident.
Wow.
Anyway, I cleared it. And it was interesting because during the evening, we'd see people walk up to the door and look at the menu and just walk away. And the menu was where this guy had died. And anyway, so I went down again. It was only a couple of weeks later. And I said, that meal was fantastic at the restaurant, wasn't it? How about we go to the same one? So she said, yes. So we go there. It's buzzing. Absolutely buzzing.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so for those people who feel like maybe they've got some some grumpy spirit hanging around, like lingering, how can they clear it? Like, when you say you clear it, do you just pray and ask their spirit guides to take them home, like I did in the shower and you've done? Like, is that what people can do?
Yeah, I'm sure anybody can do it. I think as long as their intent is right. I always feel it's rather nice to be able to identify who they are.
Okay.
And I do that by divining. And recently I was asked to do some divining for some people. And anyway, when I went down there to give them the what I discovered, there's actually two houses and like a granny flat. And then about 100 meters beyond that, there's another house. And when I divined it, there was a bad spirit under the granny flat. And anyway, so I go along and see the husband and wife, and we have a chat, and we go out and identify the place for the boar, etc. And anyway, and I told them that I'd cleared this spirit from the granny flat area. A couple of weeks later, I bumped into the husband, and he said to me, you said you cleared the spirit from the granny flat. So I said, yes. He said, I'm a true believer now, David, because he said, the mother-in-law lives there, as I knew, and he said, she has always been a pain in the butt. And he said, but since you did it, there's been an absolute personality change. She said she has now become the most beautiful, loving person imaginable.
There you are.
And I've had this sort of response from so many different people. But there's another story that I tell, and it's really lovely when you can get confirmation. And I did a whole lot of water divining for 5 different farmers up at a place called Perendry. And anyway, one of the guys there, it turned out he'd been the Shah president for 5 years. And so he knew the Shah really well. So he said, would you mind clearing the spirits all around the Shah? And I said, God, it's enormous. But I said, I'm happy to make a start. Anyway, so he gets out this great big map of the Shire of Perenjori, and there's a road running in east-west, and then an intersection. Anyway, so I normally start at the southeast corner of a property and just go along, and then when I get to the particular place where there's an entity, the divine rod will turn, and then I just put my divine rod back to square, and then I go up there and I just say no. Then when I get to I find the east and west location first, and then the north and south. So anyway, there was this intersection where I divined that 2 young men had died in an accident, and I told them the day and the month and the year. And so I said it was the car accident, truck accident, motorcycle accident. No. Anyway, he smiled at me and he said, "David, this is phenomenal." He said, on that day, that month, that year, 2 young men died in a small aircraft that crashed at that corner.
Wow. So did you send them off to the light? Like, spirit guides, come collect these, whatever's left, remnants, memories, thought forms, spirits, I don't know. Come collect them, take them.
But there's so many bad energies in houses. There's a lady I used to know, and anyway, there used to be a sanatorium nearby, so now it's a prison farm. And anyway, it was a sanatorium up till the 1950s or something. And anyway, on her property, I got that a person suffering from tuberculosis that was in the sanatorium had gone bushwalking and had got lost and died on her property. Anyway, so I cleared that away. We never got to the house. Anyway, then I phoned her. I said, "Look, we've never cleared the house." And she said, "Oh, that had crossed my mind." She said, "When can you come again?" So I said, "Look, just send me a house plan." And I said, "I can just check it out remotely." So she sends me this house plan. And so first thing I did was I said, "Is this accurate?" And it said, "No." So I phoned her up and I said, "Look, it's saying the house plan isn't accurate." And she's saying, "Oh," she said, "What does it say in the bottom left-hand corner?" So I said, "So and so." "Oh," she said, "that was the original plan." She said, "We decided to change something." So she said, "I'll send you the latest version." So that was approved. So anyway, there's a doorway coming from a kitchen in the corner of a room, and the door opens up back against this wall. And anyway, I got that there was a really bad energy there. And it's funny because when I was in Sydney last time, I went to quite a lot of places. I remember one house which was I can't remember where it was, but somewhere just off the harbour on the North Shore. And anyway, the ceiling was very high and it was absolutely packed with bookcases, bookshelves and books. And anyway, it said there was a really bad energy. And I pulled out this book, which was about 2 murders, unsolved murders, which was really quite fascinating. Anyway, I've lost my line of thought again.
You were clearing the house for a lady, she said bad energy.
Oh, that's right. Anyway, as I say, this door opened up against this wall, and I phoned her up and I said, "Look, there's this really bad energy behind the kitchen door where it opens up into the dining room." And I said, "There's no place for bookshelves or anything there because often there's books or different things." And she said, "Oh, I've got a poster board there." So I said, "Well, I can tell you how high it is off the ground and how far it is from the corner." So I told her, and she said, so she runs across the mobile phone and she said, "Oh yes, this board, she's got this poster board where she puts all the postcards from different people." And she said, "Oh, there's this postcard from this person." And she says, "I have to admit, it's not a very nice person." This bad energy was associated.
Isn't that interesting? So what did she do? She just removed the postcard, or?
Well, I cleared the energy.
You cleared the energy.
But my maternal grandfather was the manager for the Sydney Harbour ferries before the Sydney Harbour Bridge was built. Mm-hmm. And there were vehicular ferries that went across from Milston Point into Circular Quay, I suppose. And anyway, on my bedroom wall, on my dining room wall, I've got a picture of the landing place for the vehicular ferries on the north side of the harbour. Anyway, so when I discovered I could do these things, I went around the house and found these energies, and there were bad energies in this spirit, and they came from people who were drowned at that ferry terminal.
Wow. Well, I have to say about all this, we're going to wrap it up in a minute, but I have to say about all this, love conquers all. So even when you move into a house where murders have happened or whatever's happened and the energy is still lingering, you can transform it with your love. I remember moving into a house and a small young family had moved out. And it wasn't that it was bad energy. It's just that I was sleeping in one of the rooms where a little kid had slept. And this little kid got up early and he was restless. there was this really restless energy, and I could not sleep in this bedroom.
Mm.
I was restless. So I spoke to my mob, my spirit guides, said, what's happening? And they showed me that this little kid had been there, and the little kid hadn't been particularly happy. Nothing too dramatic, just very restless. And that restless energy was still living in that bedroom, and I was being affected by it,
Mm.
trying to sleep. So they didn't actually ask me to clear it as much as just to expand my energy to
Right.
dominate that. And so
Right.
love does that. Love
Right. Yeah.
dominates. Love cleans, love wipes away, just love and appreciation, and just to love and appreciate. And that's what I did to sort of clear the energy. Just allow that love energy that you are, that
Mm.
happy, joyous energy to dominate the energy, and all energy that's not a vibrational match with it will no longer linger there in this time
Right.
space.
Yes.
That's what I was told by my mob anyway, because you can imagine that all over the planet there have been places where people have been murdered and terrible things have happened. We live in a third density. We live in a very polarized environment. There's a lot of crap going on and lots of people have died. So we
Yeah.
can't get too scared about all this ghost type energy. We just have to raise our vibration so that our vibe dominates. Love conquers all, really. It dominates
Yeah.
over all the distortion that is on this planet. And you seem to be very specific that you can hone in, especially on the land.
Mm.
But you also have a beautiful, loving, energy.
Oh, thanks.
You just have to look into your beautiful blue eyes, David.
Green eyes.
Green eyes. Look into that camera. Let people see those beautiful eyes.
I don't know why they look blue.
Oh, well, they look, green, blue. Oh, look, they're beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Darling one, there's just so much more we could say. Oh, I just need to get you working. I don't know. We need to get people listening to you.
There's a lady in Germany that follows me, and she said there's something wrong with her land. Anyway, I discovered that a whole lot of what do they call them, freedom fighters or whatever they were during the war, had all been murdered on her property by the Gestapo.
Right.
Anyway, I cleared them, and she just said the place was transformed.
Yeah. I guess you just come in there with your bright, sparky energy, and you just dominate that space.
It's all about
love.
Yeah, that's right.
Love conquers all.
Yes. And it's great that we're going to, and as I say, Emmerich and myself I'm getting these buzz again, that we're just going to collectively, just make forests from the Perth all the way across to Sydney.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I bought a whole lot of trees from Emmerich's for my brother and sister-in-law and the family. I didn't know what to buy them. What do you buy somebody that's got everyone? So I just spent a few $100s and I gave them a certificate, and I go, there you go, you're replanting, you're regenerating the land. There's your Christmas present. I just really wanted to support what he was doing, and he was speaking about you helping him, and it's a beautiful thing. Oh, I could talk to you all day. It's been so fascinating. Thank you so much.
Oh, Karen, I'm just so grateful to you and to Emmerich for introducing us, and for you being enthusiastic about what you're doing and what I'm doing. And wow, wonderful. Yeah.
Well,
nothing happens by chance.
Nothing happens by chance. I'm just the start of it. I don't think that person who gave you that reading was wrong. I think that you're going to be very busy with your technology and your wisdom. I'd like to see you come out here. I've just been at this big festival called Unity. I'd like to see you come out and talk at festivals and stuff, and educate. There's so many young people who are so connected to the land.
Yeah, they're all opening up. The younger generation is a different generation.
I met this young man called Jake, who I want to have on the show, who's such an Aussie. He's like a bush tucker guy, and he's just been living out in the bush, and he used to have the long dreadies, but then he started run for parliament because he wanted to stop mining, and he had to get serious, so he cut all his locks off and he got serious. But he is the most awesome person, so connected to the land, and he's white, but he's got this indigenous soul,
Yes.
And he just an amazing dogmatic. He's got his I'm right and you're wrong, but I saw him. I saw him sort of changing as he was hanging out with all these spiritual hippies, and they You know, he was like listening to all these different points of view, and he was sort of softening, and maybe I shouldn't be so
Blowing.
dogmatic, and but you've got to be like a real warrior when you're up against politicians. And yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, beautiful one.
Namaste.
Namaste.
From
And
Nepal. Namaste.
namaste. And we'll check in with you again one day and see what else has been happening.
Lovely speaking with you, Karen. Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to have this wonderful conversation. Okay.
Well, another fascinating conversation with a fascinating individual. A bit spaced out today, I was telling him. I was spacing out as he was talking. Normally I'm more on the ball, but I've gone and made a cup of tea, so I've got a cup of tea sitting here. Yes, David Kennett. Fascinating man. Completely guided by the Devic realm, although he wouldn't tell you that. Calls it God. You can call it God if you like. But yeah, completely guided by nature, by Gaia. Hope you enjoyed that. Lots more to come from David. He says he does a lot of his work overseas in Asia. He said they're much more open to what he has to say than Australians. Australians can get, especially country people, can get very bullheaded, like can dig their heels in and like, I'm not going to listen to any of that crap. But I think that as we've gone through the fires and huge storms and floods, and he's on the other side of Australia. He's over in Western Australia, and I'm in Sydney on the other side of it's a long way. He's experiencing these huge storms and floods, and Gaia, she's gone crazy at the moment. And so these bull-headed, pig-headed farmers or people that work the land, they need to wake up and listen to her speaking, or her Devic realm, or whatever you want to call it, the kingdom. Yes, we need, the message that I got from, Gaia or the mob, you need to learn how to work with the land, not just live on the land, like work with her. And David very much does that. Fascinating man talking to, fascinating. I think I might introduce him to Penny Kelly. That would be a match made in heaven. Yeah, they could learn from each other. Penny's much more conscious about the way she communicates with the land and all the realms, the different realms. Like she talks to the gnomes and the fairies and all sorts of people. She's much more aware. She's had that Kundalini experience where it opened her up to be able to access all levels of consciousness. And David's accessing it. He's accessing it through his divining rods, or he's accessing it through his psychic ability too. He's just not as aware as Penny is in that he's doing it. He's kind of calling it God, whatever. We can call it God if you want. Anyway, exhausted today. Went out to see this brilliant movie last night called The Portal. You have to see it. Tom Cronin, who's a meditation teacher, and I've had him on the show, has produced it with another brilliant woman whose name escapes me. I don't know people personally. I can't remember your name. Anyway, she's the director. She's brilliant too. They have produced this unbelievably beautiful movie called The Portal. It's about it's about people's dysfunctional lives and how more functionality came when they started meditating and started getting more mindful and deliberate. So there's a woman who's living in Afghanistan. She was in a concentration camp out there, or a camp, and anyway, she's teaching yoga and meditation to people in these war-torn areas. And there's a guy that grew up in America, a black guy, actually, interestingly enough, produced and directed and written by Australians, and there's no Australians in it. They're all overseas. And we spoke about that. We had a Q&A last night, and he said, it's interesting, he said that Americans especially are much more open to being vulnerable and real and raw on film than Australians. Australians are a little bit more guarded, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? So all the stories, it follows all these people's stories and their traumas and what brought them to mindfulness or meditation, and then to find their bliss inside this meditation. It's a beautifully produced movie, absolutely beautiful. like any doco movie, it's a little bit slow in parts and absolutely exquisitely heart-wrenching in other parts. But everyone views everything differently. You know, some people love it and they think it's a fast pace, and some people think it's too slow. Everyone's got a different opinion, but it's a beautiful movie. And at the moment, it is not out on DVD. I'll get Tom back on the show to talk about it when it's released. But it's they've released it. They released it over a year ago, but it's only for people that are doing sort of group sharing. So you can rent it and then, you know, put it in a cinema and invite people along to the cinema to watch it, which is what we did last night. Fan Force is the name of the organisation that does that. But you have to have a group of people. I think that you have to get over 70 people to make it viable, and then have a bit of a Q&A about things. It's lovely. That's what we did last night. It was beautiful. I went with my daughter because when she was going through a bit of her dark night of the soul, I, as her mother, couldn't teach her because I'm her mother, not her teacher, right? So I sent her off to Tom to learn meditation. I didn't know what to do with her. She was beside herself, and I just thought, well, nothing you say to her breaks through her own stressful thoughts. She just has to calm those stressful thoughts down and find that connection to her inner being or to her higher self and start listening to that. And the best way to do that is through meditation. Anyway, she did his weekend course and she loved it. And now they're the best of mates. That's so funny. Tom's gorgeous. Have a look for him on one of my shows, Tom Cronin. Lovely, beautiful man. He was like the Gordon Gekko of the financial world. And then he had a physical breakdown and meditation saved him. Meditation saved him. And his mission is to inspire 1 billion people to meditate. Only a small mission. Anyway, here I am talking about Tom, but David was just lovely. I'd love to get David back on the show. He has, here he is in his late 70s, but he's got such a young energy. Hasn't he got such a young energy? And he's so youthful looking. He's got these beautiful blue eyes that we couldn't look into much of the time because he was looking down when he was speaking. But he's got a big mission. He was telling me all about it after I turned off the recording. Some psychic came to him and told him all this stuff, and it's starting to come true. And I'm a part of that prophecy. He said that, you know, around now he would start to get out there. He's not really that tech savvy. He's more, you know, hands-on on the land. But in order to get people engaged in what he's doing, and there's so many little earth angels on the planet right now, I said to him, you know, everywhere I go in Australia, especially in the country, I meet these little nature spirits that are in human bodies, human form, that are so connected to Gaia. I was telling him that I was up in Mullumbimby in winter, up 12 hours north of where I live in the country, and there was this gorgeous young girl with her dreadlocks handing out flyers in the street of a country town, and I engaged her in conversation. She had this thick English accent. I said, oh, and so she was telling me about the sustainable farm that she was a part of and how they're reforesting, you know, the land and all this stuff. She was telling me all this stuff, and she had been in the country like days, and she was already in the streets of a small country town, you know, spreading the word. These little earth angels, I tell you, Devic fairies, I don't know what you want to call them, in human form, that are here to protect the land, to work with the land, to educate people about working with her and not just living on her. Oh, it's amazing. The consciousness that's alive on planet Earth right now, the diversity, all the ascended masters, all the Devic realm, they're you know, ETs. They've incarnated into human form to help transform this world, to raise her consciousness, to shift humanity to a higher consciousness. And I tell you what, that David Kennett, he's one of them. Amazing, amazing man. Anyway, forgot to say that his business, AURIA, is Australia, and you take salt out of the name and you get AURIA. Isn't that interesting? auria.net.au, yeah, is the name of the website to the business. Michael Tamora is coming up next week. Love Michael. Going to have a fascinating conversation with him. I can't remember who else is after that. I've got people booked out for months on the show, booking people in for June, July now. So yes, more fun to come. More fun to come. I'm a poet, and I didn't know it. I'm completely spaced out today. It's like I'm on drugs. I don't know, it must have been that meditation movie I went to last night. No drugs have been taken, except for my cup of tea. Anyway, I'm not going to rabbit on too much longer. Love you all. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will see you soon. Remember to buy the book. You got it, Awakened by Death. And we might get the second one out this year, which is about people's awakenings. Yes. Bye for now. Big love.